It was a quiet morning in Washington. The sky was gray, and light rain tapped softly on the White House windows. President Joe Biden sat alone in the Oval Office, holding a warm cup of coffee. Papers were stacked neatly on his desk, but his eyes were fixed on the raindrops outside. It was a calm moment, the kind he didn't get often. Then his chief of staff walked in, holding a phone. "Mr. President, there's a message you need to see," he said. Biden looked up, eyebrows raised. The staff member handed him a secure tablet. The message was short but surprising. It came from George W. Bush's team. The former president wanted to meet, just the two of them. No press, no photographers, no public schedule. Biden leaned back in his chair, reading the message again. Bush hadn't been in the news much lately. He mostly kept to himself on his ranch in Texas. So why now? And why in private? The questions hung in the air, but the feeling was clear. This wasn't a casual meeting. Biden thought for a moment. He didn't need to check his schedule. Some meetings are more important than anything else on paper. He looked at his staffer and said, "Tell them I'll come." 3 days later, Air Force One flew low over Texas. The sun was bright, the land flat and wide. As the plane touched down near Crawford, the crew moved quietly. There were no reporters waiting on the runway. Only one black sub stood nearby. Biden stepped off the plane, his expression calm but focused. A young agent opened the door for him. "It's a short drive, sir," the agent said. The ride to Bush's ranch was silent. They passed open fields, old fences, and rows of oak trees. Biden looked out the window, lost in thought. He had met Bush many times before, during speeches, debates, and state events. But this was different. They reached the ranch. The gate swung open, and the sub rolled down a dirt path. At the end, a wooden house stood quietly among the trees. There was no crowd, no flashing lights, only George Bush, standing on the porch, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He held 2 cups of sweet tea. Biden stepped out of the car. Bush smiled and held out a cup. "Good to see you, Joe," he said. Biden smiled back, took the tea, and said, "You too, George." They walked together to the porch and sat down in 2 wooden chairs. For a moment, they didn't speak. The wind rustled the trees, and birds chirped in the distance. It felt peaceful. Neither man needed to rush. The real conversation hadn't started yet. But something was already clear. This meeting wasn't just about politics. It was about something deeper. Something both men understood without saying a word. The porch creaked gently as they rocked back and forth, waiting for the right moment to speak. The morning sun was already high in the sky when Biden arrived at George Bush's ranch. The air was warm, and the peaceful quiet of the Texas countryside surrounded him. It was a different world from the hustle and bustle of Washington, a place where time seemed to slow down. As the black sub rolled along the long dirt path toward the house, Biden couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over him. The noise of politics, the press, and the constant demands of his office all felt miles away. Bush's ranch was simple but welcoming. There were no tall fences or guards standing watch, only wide open spaces, dotted with a few barns and sheds. Biden had seen Bush's ranch before, but never like this. There were no crowds, no cameras, just a quiet place where 2 men could meet away from the spotlight. As the car slowed to a stop, Biden saw Bush waiting for him on the porch. Dressed casually in jeans and a shirt, he looked more like a neighbor than a former president. He didn't have any special security around him, no entourage following closely behind. It was just him, standing on the porch with a friendly wave. The sub door opened and Biden stepped out. He didn't say much at first. The drive had been peaceful, and there was something about this place that made words seem unnecessary. Bush walked down the steps and handed Biden a cup of sweet tea. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment it felt significant. There was no rush, no need for anything fancy. "How's the weather up there in Tisty?" Bush asked with a light smile, motioning toward the sky. Biden took a sip of the tea before responding. "Cold, as usual," he said. "You know, a little less sunny than here." The 2 men chuckled. It was a brief, light-hearted exchange, but it carried with it a sense of shared history. They had both spent years in the White House, facing the challenges and pressures that came with the job. Yet here, in this quiet corner of Texas, they were just 2 men sharing a drink and catching up. They walked over to a pair of rocking chairs on the porch. The wood creaked under their weight as they settled into the seats. Neither man spoke right away. Instead, they simply enjoyed the quiet sounds of nature around them, the gentle rustling of the trees, the distant call of birds. There was something special about this moment. The ranch was far from the chaos of politics. Here, it felt like they could be themselves. No cameras, no reporters, just the peaceful setting of the Texas countryside, offering a rare chance to slow down and connect. As they sat there, sipping their tea and watching the clouds drift by, Biden couldn't help but wonder why Bush had called for this meeting. Something important was on his mind, but for now, there was no rush to get to the point. The moment was enough. The two men, sitting in the warmth of the sun, letting time pass without hurry. The porch was quiet, except for the soft sound of the wind moving through the trees. Biden and Bush sat in their chairs, slowly rocking back and forth. The sweet tea in their hands was cool, the wooden floor beneath their feet warm from the sun. For a while, they didn't speak. They just looked out at the land, open fields stretching far beyond the trees. It was Bush who finally broke the silence. His voice was calm and steady. "You know, Joe, sometimes I think people forget what this job takes from you." Biden looked over at him, nodding slowly. "Or what it gives you," Biden replied, "if you're lucky." There was no tension in the air, just honesty. Both men had walked similar paths. They had stood before the nation, made hard choices, carried the weight of their office, and now they sat here as two men with nothing to prove. "I remember the first time I walked into the Oval Office," Bush said. "I thought I was ready. I wasn't." Biden smiled. "Same here. You think you know what it's going to be like, but you don't." They both laughed quietly. It wasn't the laugh of amusement. It was the laugh of shared understanding. Bush leaned back in his chair, eyes watching the clouds drift above the fields. "There are things I still think about," he said. "Decisions that kept me up at night. I didn't talk about them back then. Not really, but they never leave you." Biden didn't rush to answer. He let the words settle before speaking. "It's strange," he said softly. "You go through all of that, and when it's over, no one really asks how you're doing. They just move on. But we carried it, every part of it." For a moment, they were quiet again. The wind picked up slightly, rushing the trees gently. Birds flew past, landing on a fence nearby. Bush turned his head slightly and looked at Biden. "I didn't call you here for show," he said. "I just thought maybe we could talk like people, not as presidents, not as politicians, just talk." Biden nodded. "I get it. Sometimes that's what matters most." They didn't speak about parties. They didn't argue about policy. They talked like two people who had walked through storms and now sat in the calm that followed. On that quiet Texas porch, with no one watching, a different kind of conversation began. A conversation built on respect, experience, and the kind of understanding that only comes from living through something few others ever will. It wasn't about the past or the future just yet. It was about now, two former leaders, two lives shaped by the same role, finding common ground in silence and truth. As the sun shifted in the sky, the shadows on the porch grew longer, and the real talk, the one that brought Biden here, was just beginning. The sun hung lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the porch. The teacups were nearly empty, but neither man had moved to refill them. They sat in a comfortable silence, both aware that something important was on the edge of being said. Bush shifted in his chair, and for the first time, his expression grew more serious. He turned to Biden, his gaze thoughtful. "Joe," Bush began, "I think about Iraq every day, still." Biden listened carefully, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't interrupt. It wasn't just a passing statement. It was something Bush had carried for years. "The people we lost," Bush continued, his voice quieter now. "The decisions we made. I don't know if I'll ever make peace with that." There was no anger in Bush's tone, no blame, just the weight of history. The war in Iraq had defined both of their presidencies in different ways, and the memories of those years were still with them, unspoken but always present. Biden leaned forward, looking directly at Bush. "I voted for it," he said softly. "I carried that with me too." There was a long pause between them. The kind of pause where neither man needed to fill the space with more words. The quiet hung there, heavy but not uncomfortable. Bush exhaled slowly, his gaze shifting back to the horizon. Sometimes I wonder, he said after a moment, if people will ever really understand why we did what we did. The world wasn't simple back then. It felt like we were choosing between the lesser of two evils. Biden nodded slowly, his mind reflecting on the long nights of debate, the pressure from all sides. There was a lot of pressure to act quickly, to be decisive. And maybe we didn't have all the answers. Maybe no one did. The two men shared a moment of understanding. They didn't try to explain themselves to each other. They didn't need to. There was an unspoken bond between them, a shared experience that could only be understood by those who had walked the same path. I'm not sure we'll ever have the answers, Bush said finally, looking back at Biden. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough just to know that we did what we thought was right, even when it wasn't popular. Biden didn't have an easy answer for that. How do you reconcile the past when the choices made were not as clear as they once seemed? But he knew one thing for certain. They both carried the weight of those decisions. Maybe the best we can do, Biden said, is keep learning from it. Make sure we don't repeat the same mistakes. Bush smiled faintly, a look of recognition in his eyes. Yeah, that's all we can do. They sat quietly again, both lost in their thoughts. The evening was settling in, the sky now a mix of soft oranges and pinks. As they sat there, with the sound of crickets filling the air, the weight of the past felt just a little lighter. It was no longer something they had to carry alone. The quiet evening continued as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting warm golden light over the porch. Bush and Biden sat in silence, both lost in their thoughts. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one that was filled with the weight of years of decisions, moments missed, and paths taken. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Biden broke the stillness. His voice was calm but filled with reflection. You ever wonder what we could have done differently? Bush looked over at him, considering the question. It wasn't an easy one. The weight of their actions, the choices they made for the country and the people, had never left them. It was something they both carried with them every day, even in the quiet moments like this. I do, Bush said after a long pause. I think about the families who lost loved ones, the people who are still affected by everything. I think about the times I wasn't there for my own family, too. Biden nodded. It's funny, isn't it? You give so much to your country, but you lose so much at home. The time with your kids, the quiet dinners. Those things slip away without you even noticing. Bush's eyes softened as he looked at the horizon. Yeah, you think you're doing the right thing at the time, and then one day you realize you can't get those years back. They both knew it was true. The life of a president was a life full of public demands, a life that often came at the expense of personal moments. The weight of decisions made for the good of the country could sometimes overshadow the quiet moments that truly mattered. I remember watching my daughters grow up from afar, Bush continued. I wasn't always there. I wish I could have been. Biden glanced over, seeing the genuine regret in Bush's eyes. It's the hardest part of the job. You do what you think is right, but you lose pieces of yourself along the way. The two men were silent for a moment, allowing the thoughts to settle. It wasn't the kind of conversation that had quick answers. There was no perfect solution to the regrets they both carried. It was simply part of the life they had chosen. But you know, Biden said, breaking the silence, maybe that's the price you pay. Maybe that's what you have to give. Bush looked at him and nodded slowly. Maybe, but I'd give anything to have some of those moments back, to be there more. There was a soft wind blowing through the trees now, the leaves rustling gently in the evening air. The warmth of the day was fading, but there was a comfort in the quiet honesty between them. They didn't need to say everything aloud. The understanding was there, unspoken but strong. In that moment, they both realized something. They couldn't change the past, but they could learn from it. The lessons they had gained from their time in the highest office weren't just about politics. They were about life, family, and the choices they made when no one was watching. As the sky darkened, they sat a little longer, reflecting on their journeys. The regrets would never fully fade, but the lessons they had learned would remain, guiding them through the rest of their lives. The sky had turned a deep shade of blue, the stars beginning to twinkle above the Texas countryside. The porch was still, save for the gentle rustling of the leaves. Bush and Biden had been sitting for hours, talking about their past, their regrets, and the paths they had taken. Yet there was still something lingering in the air, a quiet sense of unease. Bush shifted in his chair, his expression growing more serious as he stared out into the darkness. His voice was low when he spoke again, almost as if he was weighing each word carefully before he let it leave his mouth. "Joe," Bush began, "there's something I've been thinking about, something I've been worried about for a while." Biden turned slightly to face him, sensing the change in his tone. "What's on your mind, George?" Bush paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He knew that what he was about to say was important, maybe the most important thing of the entire conversation. "This country," Bush continued, his eyes focused on the distance, "it's divided. More than ever before. I see it, I hear it. The anger, the fear, the constant fighting. It's like we're forgetting what it means to be united." Biden listened closely, his expression serious. He had seen it too. The growing divides, the way people had started to pull further apart, only focusing on their differences rather than the things that brought them together. "You think we're going down the wrong path?" Biden asked quietly, his voice reflecting concern. Bush nodded slowly, his face tight with worry. "I'm afraid of where this road might lead us. We've seen this before, Joe. We've seen what happens when the lines get too drawn. The anger turns into something bigger, something harder to stop." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Both men had lived through moments in history where the country had been torn apart, whether by war, crisis, or politics. They knew the cost of division. They had seen how easily a nation could lose its way when it was consumed by fear and distrust. "What do we do about it?" Biden asked, his tone soft but urgent. Bush shook his head, a faint sigh escaping his lips. "I don't know if there's an easy answer. But I do know this. We have to find a way to come together. We can't keep going down this road where everything is about us versus them. It'll destroy us if we don't change." Biden thought for a moment, looking out over the land. The quiet night was peaceful, but the concerns in Bush's voice were not easily ignored. The country was at a crossroads, and both of them knew it. "Maybe the first step is listening," Biden said slowly. "Really listening to each other, even when we don't agree." "Maybe," Bush agreed, his tone thoughtful. "But it's going to take more than just words. It's going to take action. People have to be willing to work together again, even when it's hard." There was a long silence between them. The air felt thick with the weight of their conversation. Neither man had all the answers. They knew that. But in that moment, they understood the gravity of the situation they were facing, not just for themselves, but for the future of their country. As the stars twinkled above them, Bush and Biden both felt a sense of urgency. The time to act was now, before the cracks in the nation grew deeper. The path forward would be difficult, but they both knew it was a path worth fighting for. The air had cooled by now, and the evening sky was filled with countless stars. The quiet of the Texas countryside was soothing, with only the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. For a while, Biden and Bush sat without speaking, each lost in their own thoughts. The conversation from earlier still lingered, heavy with the weight of the challenges they both had discussed. Biden broke the silence first, his voice thoughtful. "It's not going to be easy, you know, bringing people together again." Bush looked over at him, nodding slowly. "No, it won't be. But maybe it starts with moments like this." "Moments like what?" Biden asked, his tone curious. "This," Bush said, gesturing around them. "Two people sitting down, talking about what's important, listening to each other. No fighting, no arguing, just talking." Biden considered this for a moment. He knew that the kind of division Bush was talking about wasn't just in politics. It was in the hearts of people. It was in families, communities, and the way they saw each other. If they were going to make any real change, it had to start with small, simple acts. Listening, understanding, respecting each other, even when they disagreed. "You're right," Biden said quietly. "It starts with us. If we can't do it, then who can?" Bush smiled faintly. "Exactly. It's up to people like us to show that it's possible to disagree without tearing each other apart." They sat for a while, the sound of the wind and the soft chirping of crickets filling the space between them. Neither man rushed to speak. There was a sense of peace between them, despite the weight of their conversation. Biden shifted in his chair, glancing out at the darkened fields. I wish the whole country could have moments like this. Just calm. No cameras, no pressure. Just people talking. Bush sighed, his expression distant. It would make a difference. Maybe not all at once, but over time, it could change how we see each other. We got to start somewhere, Biden said firmly. No matter how small the step is. They both understood how hard it would be. They had seen how difficult it was to heal the wounds of a divided nation, but there was a sense of hope in their words. Hope that change could happen, even if it took time. Hope that people, despite their differences, could find a way to work together. Maybe we're just two old men talking, Bush said with a light chuckle. But sometimes talking is all you need to start something new. Biden smiled. Maybe we are, but maybe it's the right kind of talking. The stars above them twinkled brightly, as if watching over the two men in their quiet conversation. In that moment, they both understood that real change didn't have to be grand. It could start with small steps, in moments like this, where two people simply listened to each other. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the beginning of something bigger. As the night deepened, the soft glow of the stars above seemed to wrap the two men in a blanket of peace. The temperature had dropped a little, but it was still warm enough to sit outside comfortably. Biden and Bush were no longer in a hurry to end their conversation, letting the hours stretch out as they continued to talk. The world outside the ranch was still and quiet, as though it too was listening to the words being shared. They weren't making headlines, and no reporters were waiting for their next soundbite. It was just two former leaders reflecting on their lives, their past decisions, and the future of the country they had served. You know, George, Biden said after a long pause, we may not have all the answers, but I think we're getting closer to understanding something important. Bush turned his head slightly toward him, his face thoughtful. What's that? That it's about people, Biden replied. We can get lost in the politics, the policies, the debates, but in the end, it's the people who matter, the ones who wake up every day, going to work, taking care of their families. Those are the people we should be focused on. Bush nodded, his expression softening. You're right. Sometimes it's easy to forget about the people in the middle of all the noise, the ones who don't have a loud voice, but who are still the heart of this country. They both sat in quiet agreement for a few moments, each lost in their thoughts. The wind had picked up again, gently swaying the trees around them. It was a peaceful sound, the kind that brought a sense of calm after all the heavy discussions. You think we'll ever see a time when people stop fighting over everything? Bush asked, his voice carrying a hint of weariness. Biden looked up at the sky, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of stars. I don't know, he said, his voice quiet but steady. But I think it's worth trying, even if it's one small step at a time. Bush smiled faintly. Maybe. One step at a time sounds like a good plan. The night stretched on, and for a while, neither man spoke. There was something comforting in the silence now, a sense of finality to their conversation. They had shared their thoughts, expressed their concerns, and reflected on their experiences. There was nothing left to prove. As the stars began to shine more brightly, the peaceful quiet of the night seemed to say everything they hadn't put into words. Change wouldn't come overnight, and healing wouldn't happen in a single conversation. But for the first time in a long while, they felt a small sense of hope. Hope that the country could one day come together again. As they stood up to leave, neither of them rushed. The night had offered them more than just a conversation. It had offered them a reminder of what really mattered. And as they said their goodbyes, they both knew that, for all their differences, they had found something they could agree on: the need for unity, respect, and understanding. It was a simple conclusion, but sometimes the simplest moments carried the most meaning.